Okay, thank you. Good.
Okay, good evening, everybody. We'll call the meeting to order. And first item is 1.1. Are there any items on tonight's agenda that give rise to conflict or pecuniary interest? I don't see anybody making any indication, so Lana will note that there are no items. Next item on the agenda is acceptance of the agenda, item 2.1. Roger, you moved the agenda as presented. Any discussion? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, and that's approved unanimously by Councillor Avery, Lloyd, Pauls, Holm, Simpson, Chapman, and Mayor Craig. All right, thank you. And I just saw on my laptop that I got a reminder to refresh and that, so watch your pop-ups and don't let it restart your computer in the middle. Then we have item 3.1, regular council meeting minutes of February 8, 2021. Are there any errors or omissions, corrections, deletions? If there are none, I entertain a motion to adopt those minutes. Councillor Simpson, any discussion? Call the question, all in favor? Okay, and that's carried unanimously by myself, Bill Chapman, Rhiannon Simpson, Roger Holm, Butch Pauls, Doreen Lloyd, and Jason Avery. Okay, and then we have next item of business 4.1, summary of findings on 20A Avenue cul-de-sac, and Spencer will be leading, or Melanie?
I will be taking this report, Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Melanie.
So good evening, everyone. The following report is to provide council with information regarding the subdivision located on Lot 1, Block B, Plan 6651FG, and to request that the file be forwarded to the MPC for review. Staff also requests that council consider waiving the fees associated with the file due to the level of non-compliance within the subdivision. On February 11th, 2020, a compliance request was brought forward by a resident of the subdivision regarding setback waivers. And following a comprehensive review, it was determined that most of the properties within the subdivision were non-compliant with today's land use bylaw and the land use bylaw at the time of the subdivision. So some of the history associated with the subdivision includes recommendations originating from 1977 that council could either rezone the properties or waive the zoning requirements. As the application was moved or approved, it's assumed that the zoning requirements were waived. However, this isn't clear when viewing individual property files, which was shown in the request for a compliance letter back in February of 2020. The resident ultimately paid for the costs associated with taking the request for setback waivers to the MPC at their own expense. And staff is recommending that a blanket waiver be issued across the entire subdivision and that council consider waiving the fees associated with the process, as well as the potential reimbursement of the resident that applied for the initial compliance request. It is important to note that various accessory structures are also non-compliant. However, it will be recommended to the MPC that the waiver be granted for principal buildings, and all of their waivers will be applied for by property owners. For a review of the varying levels of compliance within the subdivision, I invite you to review Schedule A, where there are comparisons of zoning requirements from the two iterations of the land use bylaw, and a comparison of non-compliant versus compliant properties, with ultimately only two properties being fully compliant. And that's all that I have.
Thank you, Melanie. Are there any questions through to administration on this? Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. Just maybe to note that my residence is in the adjoining cul-de-sac, so there is no conflict of interest in any discussion or direction from this point.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Holm.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Melanie. So if we approve the waivers at this time, then if anybody in any of those subdivisions decide that they want to add a deck or something in the future, they would again have to follow our existing land use bylaws, or will they be grandfathered in as well to this new parameters that we're kind of lining up here?
Thank you for your question, Councillor. That's something that we haven't discussed in depth at this point. I would say that it would have to be within the 10% waiver at maximum if someone was going to do any additions onto a deck. But this is only relating to the principal building. We would have to look at each case individually just because they're all of different levels of compliance, but we would want to make sure that they weren't too far out of the scope of the land use bylaw.
So Melanie, with that same question in mind, I just wonder, in between, say 1977 and 2020, there's probably been outbuildings in addition to the principal residence on some of these. And so would that, would MPC or planning department look reasonably on how those buildings were situated in respect to the time frame that they were added, and give, have that kind of a mindset when you're looking at if they're compliant and have the right setbacks and whatnot? Is that how it would go forward?
Thank you for your question, Mayor. So I just want to understand a little better. Are you referring to accessory structures? So for the accessory structures, they wouldn't be a part of this waiver. Only the principal buildings would be have any sort of waiver on it. And in the future, if there were to be, if a resident was to go and seek a waiver or compliance request for their home, that would have to be reviewed individually, and it would be dependent on the property.
Spencer, do you want to add to that?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'll just add on to Melanie's excellent response to the question. I think based on what you're asking, the consideration is typically given by the Planning Commission for the context within which applications are being made. So if there's something that's been there for decades, that's typically going to be clarified by staff. And in my experience, although we can't speak to future decisions, that is something that's always considered by the Planning Commission while they're making those types of decisions.
Thank you, Spencer. Councillor Holm.
Thank you, Your Worship. Spencer and Melanie, through you, is there a way of finding out what outbuildings and et cetera, don't comply right now? So is that possibly council could have a single waiver to include everything that's there right now, so it doesn't put municipal planning in the future, now and in the future, in a tough position to try and approve one versus not another?
Certainly. Thank you for the question, Councillor Holm. Through the chair to Councillor Holm's question, I think the easy answer to that is we could broaden the scope of the recommendation on the item this evening to include accessory buildings that are in place as of right now, as well as principal buildings. And then the ultimate decision still lies with the Planning Commission. So we'll have a more comprehensive package for you by the time this makes its way to the Planning Commission for a final decision.
Councillor Chapman, do you have another question? Okay. Okay. Any other questions of administration? Are we ready to make a motion then? Councillor Lloyd?
Yeah, I'll be prepared to make the motion with the addition of that Spencer just said.
Okay, so you want to go with
there.
You're going with recommendation number 1 to
Yes.
approve with being amended to include accessory buildings, and then to also provide a refund to the original 2020 applicant for their fees.
Yes, for sure,
Okay.
yes.
We have that motion then by Councillor Lloyd. Is there any discussion? I don't see any. I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, and that's approved unanimously. Myself, Councillor Chapman, Councillor Simpson, Councillor Holm, Councillor Pauls, Councillor Lloyd, and Councillor Avery. Thank you, Spencer and Melanie.
Thank you, Mayor.
Then we're going down to business item 7.1, borrowing bylaw, line of credit, third reading. Kyle?
Yes, thanks and good evening. So we have third reading for borrowing bylaw. First and second readings were presented to council at the last council meeting. Just kind of to summarize the reasons for this bylaw. The town is in a healthy cash position and we don't anticipate having to draw or to use such line of credit for any time in the future. However, this bylaw does essentially provide the town with the financial resources that could be required, in various situations such as cash emergencies as they may come up, bridge financing, and it also gives the town the ability to leverage further additional financing options, which the town can explore for earning additional investment income, ultimately increasing the revenue for the town. So if council does choose to pass this bylaw, we don't anticipate that this bylaw would be used and would have a negative impact on the town's operating budget. Rather, we would use it to leverage existing opportunities if required to, again, namely, leverage existing financial options. And again, it also may be required in times of emergency. Going back to COVID-19 and the deferral of the property tax bylaw, there was approximately $5 million of property taxes that were delayed several months due to this program. While the town did have excess cash to manage that, we did have to manage our cash flow for that. Having an option like this would just provide the town an extra layer of protection. Again, this line of credit does not have any costs associated with it until the funds are utilized, again, which we don't anticipate for the near future. With that being said, I will turn that back to council for questions.
Thank you, Kyle. Are there any questions of Kyle? Councillor Chapman?
Thank you, Worship. At our last council meeting, it was brought up about the possibility of last year's issues with COVID and that. Kyle, do you anticipate anything like this resurfacing again, that we might have to dip into that line of credit?
This time, we don't anticipate having to use this line of credit for anything in the near future, to be frank, even long term. But again, the COVID-19 pandemic, everybody knows how rare these types of situations occur. So you can never rule out the possibility of an emergency like this happening again. But from an operational or capital point, we don't anticipate using this at any point in the future right now.
Good, thank you, Kyle. And I should bring the viewing audience's attention that you are acting CAO filling in for CAO Hastings today. So just for the record, sorry for that omission. If I don't see any other comments or questions, I'd entertain the motion to sponsor third reading if that's council's wishes. Councillor Lloyd? Councillor Lloyd, our sponsors start reading. She was quickest at the hand raising. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? And so we have 6 in favor, myself, Councillor Chapman. Oh, all opposed? I better ask that. Okay, thank you, Councillor Avery. So in favor was myself, Councillor Chapman, Councillor Simpson, Councillor Holm, Councillor Pauls, Councillor Lloyd, and opposed is Councillor Avery. Okay, thank you, Kyle. And then we have next item is communications policy C022. Leah Cathro, you're gonna introduce this. Thank you, Leah.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So the purpose of this report is to review the revisions made to the communications policy. This policy was first approved in 2013 and revised in 2016. Some changes have been made to the policy to outline the current expectations for creating and distributing media within the communications department on behalf of the town. So I'm just going to walk through some of the more significant changes to the policy. All of the changes made are attached to the staff report, as well as a clean version underneath, so you can take a look and read through what's been changed. So for starters, throughout the policy, the title Communications Coordinator has just been changed to Communications Department, as that title does not exist within the organization. This should mitigate any changes or additions to staff in the future. Aside from this, most of the changes focus on managing the expectations for how we use social media, which is shown in Appendix 5.2 of the policy. So here we break down the roles and responsibilities with using social media and provide recommendations for how staff and council members can interact with the town's social media content if they choose to do so. While it's not a requirement for a town council to have an active social media account, it's apparent that residents and users like to communicate through social media, and so it may be a useful tool for council members to communicate. So the next major change outlines the most productive forms of using the town's social media accounts. Most notably in this section, it's stated that direct messaging on this feature, or the direct messaging feature on social media platforms, is to be disabled, a decision made after much deliberation. So over the past several years, the town has taken several approaches to respond to direct messages, and we found that the irregular nature of direct messaging can make it challenging for staff to respond to questions and concerns quickly and effectively, as they can through phone calls, emails, or in person. So disabling this feature just ensures that concerns are addressed quickly by the appropriate members of administration who have an in-depth understanding of the issue. Finally, the social media policy expands on the code of conduct, which now distinguishes how users, staff, and council are expected to interact with the town's social media page. And it also sets precedent for the regulation of inappropriate behavior. So at this time, I would request that council make a decision from the following options, which are that council approve the policy revisions, council decline the policy revisions, or that council direct administration to prepare changes to the communications policy to be presented for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. Are there any questions of Leah? Well, looks like you did a good job. Councillor Simpson?
Thank you, Your Worship. So I just have one question that's communication and kind of with the planning, is when we give out notices that we're having you know, a bylaw change or whatever, and we put advertisements in the Sunny South News, is that something that would, because a lot of people say that they don't get the Sunny South News, is that would be something better as a mail out town-wide instead of the newspaper, or does it have to be through the newspaper?
Maybe Spencer can speak a little more to that. I know he's the one that puts the ads in the newspaper.
Thank you, Leah, and through the chair to Councillor Simpson, thanks for the question. I think if I understand correctly, you're asking if we can use direct mailouts to the town for things like land use bylaw amendments. Okay, so we have the option to do one or the other as per the requirements of the Municipal Government Act. I believe it's section 606, if I remember correctly, but more importantly, we, as do many other communities, choose to mail out and put in the paper as well. Now, where we maybe find a gap is that with the Sunny South newspaper, that's intended to reach all members of the community in a general sense, those who subscribe to the newspaper. It's kind of the same issue that the city has with the Lethbridge Herald, for instance. And then where we try to prop that up, or the gaps that that might create, is by mailing out to at least adjacent residents or adjacent property owners when a land use bylaw amendment or something else that's going to affect a property is made by way of application. And usually it's beyond the adjacent property owners. It's maybe 50, 100 meters out from the boundaries of the property in question. However, it's certainly a topic for discussion, and there are other avenues that we can take through the land use bylaw. Again, that the Municipal Government Act gives us the authority to explore things like using digital means. So we can also formally recognize posting our amendments on the website, for instance, as a form of advertising for things like bylaw amendments and public hearings. So that's something that we'll probably touch on in March. We're planning on bringing an update to the planning and development activities over 2020 to council in March, and we can include that as a part of the questions of how do we best move forward and improve our processes, as we're always focused on continuous improvement with things like that.
Thank you, Spencer. Is there any other questions of administration? Did anybody care to make a motion with regards to this business item? Councillor Simpson?
Thank you, Your Worship. So I'll make a motion to approve the communication policy as it's being revised. So it was very thorough. You guys did a great job.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Are there any questions? I don't see any, so I will call for the question. All in favor? Okay, I see 7 in favor of that motion. Myself, Councillor Chapman, Councillor Simpson, Councillor Holm, Councillor Pauls, Councillor Lloyd, and Councillor Avery. That's approved unanimously. Thank you, Leah.
Thank you.
Next item is 9.1 departmental reports. Is Coaldale Public Library newsletter and calendar of events. Maybe Councillor Simpson, you have anything to add to that item?
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't have anything to add. It's a pretty thorough report, so it has all the information, I think, in there.
Are there any other questions addressing that report? If there are none, I consider a motion to receive that report for information. Councillor Chapman moves. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? And that's approved unanimous. That's by myself, Councillor Chapman, Councillor Simpson, Councillor Holm, Councillor Pauls, Councillor White, and Councillor Avery. Next item is 12.1. Big Brother. That was sent out to us and we added it as an information item, and I think it'd be worthwhile to maybe add it to our the town social media platform to see if volunteers in the community want to come forward. Okay, oh, Councillor Holm,
I would move that for information and agree that it would be nice to have it added to our social media platform.
okay. So we have a motion by Councillor Holm. Any other discussion? I see none. I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, that's all seven. Councillor Avery, Lloyd, Pauls, Holm, Simpson, Chapman, and myself. So that's unanimous. So we have, I think we're done all the public portion that I can see. Is there anybody care to move it into closed session then? Councillor Chapman? All in favor? And that's carried unanimously by myself, Councillor Chapman, Councillor Simpson, Councillor Holm, Councillor Pauls, Councillor Lloyd, and Councillor Avery. And we'll move into closed session through the NETS platform. So we'll all dial into the NETS